Okay. All right. So welcome everybody to MAYDAYCON 2020. This is our fifth panel of 7 total today. I am your moderator, David Walters, and just want to say a quick thank you for tuning in. Again, a quick note, as has been the rest of the day, it's a live free stream, so feel free to jot any questions, comments down. We'll try to pick out some questions if we have time. But first, we're just going to start with some introductions from our panelists, and we'll start with Mr. Cameron, and we'll just kind of go across and down.
Hi, I'm Miles Cameron. I don't own a headset, so I may be unclear when you hear me. I write both fantasy and historical novels, and I'm excited to be here. And it's been a really great con so far. I have really enjoyed the other panels and the readers.
Hi, I'm Alina Boyden. I'm a fantasy novelist as well, and yeah, really excited to be here. It's a nice change of pace from not talking to anybody. So,
I'm Myke Carey, or MR Carey. I write comics and fantasy, sci-fi, a little bit of horror, whatever comes my way, really.
Hi, I'm Peter V. Brett. I'm the author of the Demon Cycle series from Del Rey Books. The first book is The Warded Man here in the US and The Painted Man in the UK. And the series is complete at this point, so it's great quarantine binge read.
I'm Myke Cole. I write fantasy, science fiction, history. I've also sort of turned into a journalist in the last few months. My most recent book is 16th Watch, which is out from Angry Robot. It's the Coast Guard in space. I have a comic called 100 Wolves, which will be coming out from Vault Comics in September. And my new history book, The Bronze Lie, Shattering the Myth of Spartan Warrior Supremacy, will be coming out from Osprey in February. And I'm on TV sometimes. I do a lot of things.
What are you drinking?
Well, thank you for asking. I am drinking Fort Hamilton, which is an excellent bourbon that is made in Bourbon Brothers. Perfect.
Mike comes over to my house and he always brings bourbon with him. And I thought it was like a gift for me, but it's really just so that there's good bourbon in my house when he comes over.
Basically, my motto. Fort Hamilton's excellent, and my other bourbon recommendation is Bow and Blade. Yeah, I don't know if we had mentioned that this was going to be a drinking panel, so I did check and make sure everybody was drinking before we started. So I'm not drinking alone.
you're not drinking alone.
I was clear to tag everyone when I mentioned it was a drinking panel.
Cheers. Cheers. Miles is double fisting.
Cameron's double fisting. Yeah,
perfect.
So. Obviously, our main panel topic, the writing process, is it ever perfected? And I jokingly had the first question as well, is it? But seriously, does writing ever become a streamlined process, or does it always hit bumps, obstacles, and stopgaps?
I don't know. I'm writing my 6th full novel now, and with every novel, I start writing it, I'm just like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like, I don't know if I've lost my gift or if I just like was a fraud the whole time and don't have no idea what I'm doing. And then like after a little while, you hit the point of like, oh, I know what I'm doing. This is fine. And then you like, there are sort of ups and downs through that creative process that are repeating themselves. And now I sort of recognize them sooner and like freak out about them less, because I'm like, oh, right, I had the same moment of doubt for this book or that book, and I know it'll pass. But it never gets easy. Like, it's always, every book is a new mountain to climb.
I guess I would say that it shouldn't perfect itself. If it does, it probably means that you're writing the same book over and over again. Because you as you were just saying, Peter, you solve the problem of the book that you're working on. You think your way into that book. You find the approach, you find the voice, and you write the book. If you start the next book and it's effortless, it's probably because you're still in that same space. You haven't you haven't been through that process again.
Sure. I mean, and there are very famous fantasy authors who write the same book over and over and over again, and everybody loves it. And so there's nothing wrong with that. But you're right. If you're challenging yourself, it's hard every time.
The AC/DC of fantasy novels. I don't know. I think it's funny though that Peter described my process exactly. But if you ask us what our actual physical process is, it could not be more completely different, because he like writes outlines of books, which just, I don't understand how you do that. That seems strange.
I mean, Alina and I have become friends and text about writing a lot. So like, there's some insider baseball here, but like, Alina writes a book in like a month.
Wow.
If I'm slow, if I'm feeling like I'm real slow.
Yeah,
Good.
she's like, oh, you know, I need to write another 40,000 words. I'll have that done by Tuesday.
Alina, how long did Stealing Thunder take? How long did Stealing?
Oh, you don't really want to know. Do you
I do want to know.
Stealing Thunder took me, I think 13 days, start to finish. The last 30,000 words I wrote in one day, one afternoon. Because like what happened is I had not finished it because I wasn't sure about it. I had that moment of doubt. And then a friend of mine was like, you should finish it. And I was like, when I don't finish things, I just don't finish them. And she was like, you should finish it. And I was like, well, if I'm going to finish it, I'd better like give myself motivation. So I queried it and lied that it was finished, expecting that if anybody wanted it, they would just tell me like, well, give me a partial. And then I would have like months to write it. And then immediately the person was like, I'd like to see the full manuscript. I was like, oh, fuck. So then I was like, well, so I wrote the last 30,000 words in one day and sent it to them. So yeah.
How long a day was that?
It was, let's see, I was taking breaks every 3,000 words.
Hours.
No, it was probably like 12, like 10 to 12.
Oh my God.
Well, hold on. I really want to hear about this. This is fascinating. So was that 12 hours of just like forgetting to eat, or like, oh my God, my bladder's full, or like, was it just like?
No. I basically said, I'll write 3,000 words and then I'll take like a 10-minute break, and then I'll write 3,000 words and take a 10-minute break. And so I was taking 10-minute breaks every 3,000 words, and I write about like, I don't know, 1,000 words an hour. So it's like, I don't know how, maybe more than that. Yeah, it must be more than that. I don't remember how many.
Alina,
it was a lot.
Do you not have a copy? Hold on. I have a copy.
Wait, I have a copy of what?
But this is insane. This is insane.
What is? I mean, it's just like, yes, I have. Oh my God, you have a copy.
It takes me
just
2 years.
Wow.
Just so folks, I'm sorry, I have this awful SteamYard tag there, Dave. If you can get rid of it, I'd be so grateful.
Sorry, I can't. I'm sorry.
I'll take one for the team. But this is for folks who are watching on YouTube. This is the book that is being discussed.
Yeah. And if I like look at it,
and it's excellent. You would never know that it was written in 13 days.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the time. I don't necessarily think that like spending a lot of like hours not writing is an effective way of getting a book out there, though. Like that's the other side of it, right? Like it just doesn't really. Okay, well, I mean, you have far more experience than I do, so I'm gonna let you have that. But yeah, so basically, if you pick up the book, like from page roughly 250 to 346 or somewhere in that range was written in one day. So yeah.
Well, but what's awesome about this is that one of the things I beat myself up on, and one of the things that I have always thought of as a truism in writing is that if you rush, if you go too fast, that that's wrong. That's no good. You have to. And this is and I get this because I learned how to write basically from Pete. And Pete's process is extremely deliberate. It's extremely slow. It's extremely giving the cake as long as the cake needs to bake. Like that is Pete's thing. Pete's a very successful writer. So you look at that and you think, well, that must be the correct way. But what's clear here, especially when you read Stealing Thunder and you see what a great book it is and you see how it's doing, is that it is that the underlying thing here is that the process is individual, right? Here's an example of you wrote, let's see, you said from page 250, you wrote this much of the book.
Yeah.
In a day.
Yeah.
And it's sold.
Yeah.
And
you know what the really funny part is all the reviews.
And it's a great freaking book. So like
all the reviews say like, wow, it really picks up at the end and is fantastic. What a great ending. And I'm like, oh God, like I just need to write everything in one day and then it'll be perfect.
So there's a lesson. And the lesson is the process is individual. And that process is connected to who the writer is and where they are in their lives at that time. That's actually a really good takeaway.
Not having kids, not having distractions.
I'd kind of like to suggest another thing too, which is it's possible that the more you write, the better you get at it. I know that that's not always a wildly popular thing, but playing off of something else I do, which is sword fighting. I'm a much better fencer than I was at 18 when I thought I was the best fencer in the world, and I was consistently proven not to be the best fencer in the world, and that didn't bother me because I was 18. But I'm on book 41. I'm learning a very sharp lesson right now about writing. I don't write as fast as you, Alina, but I write pretty fast. And I've been on some panels to talk about the writing process. I'll make this quick, but I've always said a thing, and I'm not going to say it today because due to COVID-19, I'm writing a free novel sort of publicly on Facebook, an ancient Greek novel. And I'm learning that some of the things I've piously mouthed over the years are crap. I actually do have more function than I thought. I do outline more carefully than I thought. And I really miss not being able to go back and back write. Because of course, if you're putting your writing live on Facebook each day, you can't go back and fix a plot error 80 pages later or whatever. And I suddenly realized, oh, all that stuff I've said about writing chronological linear, apparently I don't actually do that. I'm full of crap. But I will also say to what Peter said, I have changed technique. Like, I don't know, I've written a bunch of books and I no longer write the way I did when I was writing spy novels 15 years ago. I hope we all get better as we go. Maybe that's all I have to say, is that like the more you do of it, the more you practice, the more you learn what you like and what you don't like. And I know we're not supposed to ask the questions, but I would ask, like, do you learn things reading other people's books? Because I do all the time.
Yeah, definitely.
That's the only reason I read other people's books.
I can remember reading the first Hunger Games and just being blown away by how expertly she judges the chapter breaks. The chapters are really short and sweet, and they always end on something tantalizing and amazing that forces you to go on and read one more. It's a beautiful piece of writing. The second and third, not so much, but the first one is incredible.
I feel exactly the same way.
I think there are two.
Just that the Hunger Games is great.
I have a quote from Interview with a Vampire that I always use to talk about the writing process. And I will admit that this is from the movie. But there's like this moment where Louis and Lestat are talking about why Lestat can read minds and Louis can't. And Lestat just turns to him and says, he shrugs and he's like, the dark gift comes to each of us differently. And I really feel like that's how it is about writing. Like
Pete actually says
every one of us writes completely differently. I don't know if he actually says it in the book, so I don't want to.
Well, Pete, but I will say this, and Alina will agree with me. This is a thing Pete says to his friends who write.
But
he texts
it's so spot on. Like every bit of writing advice can, like you should consider it and see if it applies to you. But in the end, it may not work for you because all of our brains work differently, and like the book comes out of your brain. Yeah. For every sentence I write, there's like a pace around the room, and I'll like, writing and rewriting in my head and like wringing my hands, and then I go back and I write a sentence, and then I come to the next thing and I sort of consider it and I walk around some more, and like it's a very slow drawing it out of me. I could never sit down and just like vomit out 30,000 words. Like that's not how my brain works. Actually, Pete, I like my end product, so
I think that's a good point.
Yeah. Peter, one of my oldest friends in Toronto and one of my wife's best friends since childhood is a writer who's won the Toronto Book Award, and she's been shortlisted for the Booker. She's a really serious writer. She likes to say that on a good day, she puts out 125 to 250 words. And no, she's not kidding. I've actually sat with her in a coffee shop and written, and she taught me that what you just said is absolutely true. We all have our own way, and like we can all just be friends.
No, I mean, there's no rivalry here. It's just different for everyone.
I have a question for Pete, if you're willing to answer it. Was that your first 5 books are very, very different than the book you're working on right now. And you and I have had some really interesting conversations about how that process has been entirely different. So you absolutely conduct this question if it's going to reveal.
No, I don't care. I'll talk.
All right. So here's a great example, right? You are now writing something completely different.
Well, the key difference, I'll just say it, is that my first 5 books were third person, and now I'm writing a first person book. And I wrote that first person book. Maybe I maybe went into it with a bit of arrogance, thinking like, oh, you know, I know how to write books and like I can just switch person, but it's not that simple. I wrote a book like that was, the plot was good, it's solid, but it keeps slipping into a sort of third person point of view rather than a very direct first person one. And I got to the end of the book, and when I sort of realized that, you know, in third person you want to show and not tell, but in first person you have to tell and not show. And that was once I made that mental shift, I was like, oh shit, I need to rewrite this, you know, like so much of this book to reflect that. And so I'm doing a deeper rewrite than I've ever done on a book before, because I had this like one moment of clarity where I was like, oh, I was doing this wrong the whole time, and had to go back and redo it. But I think that the final product is going to be amazing as a result, because like I put all those hours into it. I'm
And
like
show, don't
really happy
tell.
with how it's.
I was just going to say, show don't tell is like the dumbest piece of advice for novelists that I've ever heard in my life. Like maybe it works for screenwriters or something, but like the idea that you're not telling when the whole thing is you writing a story that's telling people a story. I'm just like always confused by that. And especially
It's
since
sort
I
of
write
just a
first person.
general sense to not be passive.
Right, sure. I guess maybe, which is better advice than show don't tell, because I'm always like,
Well,
well, writing this in first person, I'm going to tell you what happened. So
the correct
I don't
advice,
know.
the correct advice is show and tell, right?
Right,
I
both,
mean, like
guess, sure.
do it, you know, like pay attention, and when it's appropriate, show.
Write
and
a
when it's
comic
appropriate-
book, right? That's
Well, this
Well,
is
show and tell.
Writing comic books was how I learned to write. Really, I did comic books. I spent my 20s writing terrible novels that had no shape or structure at all, and then I started writing comics. And the thing about comics is you kind of have to think about the structure, because you've got a canvas that's a very fixed size, and if you run out of pages before you run out of story, then you're screwed. So you have to cost everything out in terms of pages. You have to obsess about structure. And you come out of that with much better, well, I came out of it with a much better ability to sort of control the pace and flow of a story.
Yeah,
this is absolutely true. And I just want to say I was very excited to be on this, I'm pointing in the wrong direction. I'm very excited to be on this panel because I realized that like I read all of Myke's Hellblazer graphic novels and freaking love them. And I was and like 2 days ago I was like, oh, it's that Myke Carey? Great.
Yeah.
Like
So,
and
Myke, one of your artists for some of your Hellblazer run, Tony Akins, is my artist for 100 Wolves.
Okay.
So we have a comic book shared pedigree, and I know Alina.
Cool.
I don't know if Alina's willing to talk about it or not yet, but Alina is also working on a comic.
I am working on a comic, a graphic novel, YA aimed, because that's kind of a new emerging thing, or at least it was until COVID. We'll see if it still is. But yeah, that'll be exciting. I'm working with somebody in a more graphical sense is totally foreign to me. I am not a very visual thinker, not a very visual writer. Sometimes I'm like, people are like, what do the characters look like? I'm like, oh, like that's not how my brain works. Like, I guess, I don't know, whatever it says is how they look. That's fine. I don't know. I don't know if anybody else is like that, or if it's just me, but I have a real hard time with the whole visual aspect of things. But
comic book dialogue, the punchiness of how that you have to convey so much information about a character or about what's happening in the plot in literally a single line or 2 lines of dialogue absolutely upped my novel writing game. It changed my prose. And this goes to what Miles was saying before. And one of the things that I think none of us have said now is that writing process is also a function of where you are in life, right? It's a function. So
Yes,
Pete has 2 small children. We talk about this all the time. Well, I'm sorry, Cassie is, I guess she would be very upset with
one
me.
one mid-sized child and one
Thank
small.
you, right? So I apologize, Cassie, if you're watching this, that I called you small. I do not think of you as small. But the point is, when you have that in your life, Alina talked before about having no children. Miles has talked about, I don't know, his experience with Platea 2021 that is happening, or your fencing career. Like, these are things that
I have a teenager.
How old's your teenager? How old's your teenager?
16.
Okay.
COVID-19 is not ideal for 16-year-olds. In case no one else has one, this is hell come to earth for the social life of a 16-year-old girl.
Well,
oh my god!
That's the thing. Like a 16-year-old, like the benefit of having a 16-year-old is they're usually not in the house. Like by that point, they're like, they don't want to be there any more than you want them there. So wow, okay.
Sorry, Miles.
I mean, I'll still take that over my 3-year-old, but
well, but the point being is that your life circumstances impact when you can write, where your headspace is when you sit down to write.
Yeah.
I'm a single guy with a steady day job who lives alone. What you're seeing in my background is basically my entire life, except when I go outside to do volunteer supply runs or work out in the park or whatever. But like the pandemic, which sits on all of us, right? That impacts where our headspace is. And I bet you that we will all talk about a year from now or 2 years from now what our COVID-19 writing looked like and why it was different. And we are probably, as we speak now, not aware of that difference. But when you talk about the individuality of writing and when you talk about how the process is impact, look, we're human beings and our brains are these malleable, organic things. There's all this talk about anxiety and depression and how that impacts writing. And I think the reason that all of this talk exists is because that is so integral to our writing process, right? It's where we're at in life and what's going on. And the truth is we probably don't even know what's going on. I don't know about the rest of you, but I look back on every single book. Example here, The Armored Saint is probably my most popular fantasy novel. And there's this scene, thank you very much. There's this scene in it where this older mentor figure is talking to the protagonist who has just taken a swing and missed on the love of her life. And she's, just devastated by this and doesn't ever want to love again. And he's sort of saying, look, I know you're in pain, but the act of loving, the fact that you tried to love, the fact that you're a person who loves is what makes you a decent human being. Like that's a good thing and you must never turn your back on it. And it's years later that I look back at that book and I realized I was coaching myself through a breakup, right? That literally had just happened to me. And I had no idea when I was writing it. If you had put a gun to my head and said, why are you writing this scene? I would have said, well, I'm just trying to write a great book here. I don't know what you're talking about. It isn't until it's retrospectively that you look back on your own work and you see these events in your own life playing out, even when you don't mean them to.
There is a therapy aspect to writing where whatever the problem that you're wrestling with at a certain time bleeds out into your prose. And sometimes you clean that up in the editing phase and wash it out. And other times it becomes like an overriding theme of one of your books. And sometimes you look back at a book and realize there was a theme there that you didn't even do on purpose because it was just where your head was at the time. That is absolutely true. I can talk about that for any one of my books, really.
I couldn't agree with Myke more. And I'm just going to say one of the things I can see when I look back at my own books. And I think one of the anyway, I'll leave that aside, is, I was angry that day.
No, Miles, I want to hear about your own book and where it played in. I want to hear that specifically, please, if you don't mind.
Well, I noticed that characters I loved myself that I wrote. Does that sound dumb? Anyway,
no,
no, they're real people in your head.
Yeah, that doesn't sound dumb at all.
I can recognize when Eramnestos of Plataea has become an asshole because I was angry. And I think I'm a good enough writer that I play off that because all of us are angry. And when we're angry, we're usually assholes. And I have people react to him that way. But nonetheless, I read back over it and go, I wonder what was going on that day. Because that's not what I really think about the world. And that's super fun because now when I read other people like C.J. Sherry, I'm a big C.J. Sherry fan, or Alexander Dumas, and I come to that moment where, for instance, Porthos is acting out, and I go like, "So, Dumas, what was going on in your life that day?"
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing that like it makes your characters real. That like, look, every one of us is a dick sometimes. Like it just happens. Like some days, like you just like you need to get to the bathroom and somebody won't stop talking, and like you say or you talk or behave differently than you would otherwise. And like if we don't include that in our fictional characters, they're not really three-dimensional. And like sometimes you'll look at a character and be like, oh, why would they say that? That's not the kind of person they are. But you know what? Like sometimes you're just having a shit day and like you're a bit of a dick. And like that, if that gets washed out of your fiction, then your characters start to seem flat.
Colin McCarthy, who was the director on Girl with All the Gifts, said to me quite early on in that collaboration, you need to know the worst thing about your good characters, your protagonists, and the best, most noble almost admirable thing about your villains, your antagonists. It doesn't matter whether it comes out in the story or not. You need to know it's there, so that you don't write them as just a plot function.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, that's like a lot of. I had some reviews of Stealing Thunder because there's a character in there who's kind of well, he's a rapist, but he's also somebody who, in the prose, comes off as really not likable, but also not that he never does anything that's not like that he never does something good. That doesn't happen because that's not how people are, right? Like you can end up with really complicated circumstances where you might have accusations against a presidential candidate you're probably going to vote for anyway, because those are the circumstances we find ourselves in, right? Like, so I think that it's one of those things where in fiction, it's your duty as an author to have your characters have some of that grit and depth to them. I don't know if it necessarily comes out, like, I don't know if when I'm angry, I write angry characters. I think when I'm angry, I don't write. Like, if something in real life is distracting me, I have a really hard time writing. I need something to be like sort of.
Do you remember where you were on that 30,000 word day?
In terms of my emotional level,
yeah,
I was like, shit, I better crank this out. That's what I was thinking. Like, I was like, guess I better sit down and write. And I kind of did a plan. I was like, okay, well, it's going to be 30,000 is a lot of words. So take a break I think I took a break every 10,000 words. I don't really remember. It was kind of a blur, but I was like, yeah, just crank it out. And also, like, I was used to writing really long papers for grad school, like at the last minute. And so I was like, okay. And those like require all these source citations. And so you have to be able to do all the bibliography and everything. And so you have to have like 70 sources in your bibliography and write the paper, and doing that the night before is a pain in the ass. So, so having had that experience, I felt like I was well prepared for the, for writing the end of Stealing Thunder. Though, I mean, it's not always that fast. And I think too, what Miles was saying makes sense to me, because if people ask me like, how do you write? Do you outline? No. Do you write chronologically? Yes. So you get the characters, you write them through chronologically. But like, I prune the heck out of my books. Like, I will write and I will realize, like, no, at some point, this path was not the path it should have taken. Like, I introduced the character I should have introduced, or I did something that I shouldn't have done. And like, actually, this was where the book was last good. And everything after that point is not good. So I will just delete that entire chunk.
What's
so like
the largest
but the thing
chunk?
is that, like, when you just delete 15,000 words, you're deleting a day's work. It's not the same as it is for the rest of us.
Hold on. I want to know, Alina, what is the largest chunk that you were just
okay?
Like,
So two things. First of all, the most recent chunk. The most recent chunk I was writing, and Pete knows this because I tell him every day just to bother him. But I'm writing this new YA project. I got to the 40,000 word mark, and I was really unhappy with it. This was this week, and I was like, fuck. And so I was like, okay. So I deleted it all the way back to 16,000 words. So I deleted 24,000 words. And then as of, that was 2 days ago. As of noon today, I'm at 52,500 words. So basically, I wrote all of that back in one day, plus 10,000 words, then added another 10,000 yesterday. And then today I didn't really get a chance to write because I had to help somebody move some stuff and do this. So, anyway, so the largest I've ever done was probably the sequel to Stealing Thunder. The book is 124,000 words long. I wrote it over the course of 6 months, and I wrote 450,000 words, and 124,000 of those made it into the book. So the largest chunks were like 80 or 90K, something like that. I don't know. Somewhere in that range.
Mike and Peter are about to start crying.
I just chuck it, and then I normally save it.
Look at this vein on my forehead, like this.
But I never go back to it, so I wonder now why I even keep it. I should just hit the delete button and own it at some point.
No. You always keep your ghost work.
Yeah,
never delete anything for real.
You have an excised. I have an excised words file, and anytime I delete stuff, I paste it in there. Right? That's what everybody does. I hope.
Be too big a file at this point.
You don't know yet if there will be
I just
an
duplicate
Alina Boyden
the file.
Presidential Library, and they'll need that for the archives.
Right.
I just duplicate the file
safe.
so that I have, and then rename it with a new draft, and then delete everything that I want to delete, and then march on with the writing.
All right, so but you have that old draft, so that
I do, but I've never ever there's never been a time where I was
you never go back to it,
the
but you keep it anyway.
Alina, when you're the next freaking George R. R. Martin, like your fans are gonna, yes, you are, and your fans are gonna want that. They're gonna want that.
Well,
they're not gonna want the shitty version of the book. Like, who wants that? That's terrible. The one
Collector.
Here's the one that I
That
thought
is
was
true.
totally bullshit.
That is true.
Why don't you read that? Like, buy it.
I have versions of
We're not
books
there
that I
yet.
would never want anyone to read ever, ever, ever.
I mean, I have, like, Stealing Thunder was my 201st manuscript, so I have 200 manuscripts I don't want anybody to see. So
It sounds like your process is just about the opposite of mine. I have a fairly I have a set word count every day, and it's usually about, if I get to 2,000 words, then I feel like I've earned my keep. If I'm in the groove, I'll carry on. But I often stop around about the 2,000 mark, and that will usually be early evening. I obsessively outline. I usually do like a 20 or 30,000 word abstract of the novel before I start writing it, but I don't stick to the outline. The outline is there as a safety net. Once you start writing, something more organic starts to happen. You start to live in the space of the characters. You start to fill out the world, and it starts to make sense to you in a way that the outline didn't. But it's good to have the outline, and I can't work without it. I can't sort of skip that stage.
I keep my
I'm a
outlines
lot
in my
closer
head,
to
I
that.
think. I mean, do you, Peter? I always wanted to know: do you at some point go off of your outline that's 1,000 pages long? Do you ever go off of that?
Well, I'm not never, but very infrequently.
Really?
For every book that I've written, there is an outline that is somewhere between 150 and 200 pages. That's just basically just. It's not even it's like a bulleted list. It's like chapter 1, this person's POV. This happens. Section break. This happens. Chapter 2, and I lay that out for the entire book so that I know everything that happens in that book from the beginning to the end, so that I know that the pacing is right. I know that the sequence of events makes sense. I know that the climaxes are where I want them to. I know that the timelines all sync up. And like when I have that document, I'm trying to keep my hands, I talk with my hands, trying to keep them on the camera. But when I have that document like all together, then I start writing the prose. So usually there's a couple of months of work before I even start writing prose. And then when I do, the prose is about how do the characters feel about the stuff that I already know is going to happen. So there is an exploratory phase in the prose writing that's different from my outlining. The outlining is all like Vulcan, trying to talk with my hands, and like it's very like logical and like not full of emotion. It's like this sequence of events happens, and that gets us to the thing that happens at the end, and here's the secret of how they solve it. And then when I start building in the emotions to it, then you sort of feel this character who's going through this sort of pivotal moment in history or whatever, and you experience their emotional state through that, and that's sort of what carries the book and makes it accessible and lovable, and makes you care about the plot, because you wouldn't care about the plot if you didn't care about the people. So there are two phases to my writing, but like this is why like I have a very structured process. I cannot just like, I used to do that. I used to just jump in and free write, and like, look, it works for some people, but in the first draft of The Painted Man, also known as The Warded Man, I wrote one draft and submitted that, and it was a bad draft.
It wasn't.
It was terrible. The whole second half of it was garbage, and like
you got to send it to me so I can.
And it was entirely Arlen POV. There were no other POVs.
The book needed work, but
it ends with Arlen being the Duke of Angiers and building warded roads. And it's boring and stupid, and like it's bad.
Look, it needed work.
And when my agent pointed that out to me and made me rewrite 60% of the book in order to get it to something that could sell, something clicked in my head, and I realized you can't just make this shit up as you go. You have to know where you're going, or else you waste all of this time and you waste all this effort. And so it completely changed my writing process. And from that point forward, I was very clear about my story outlines, and I'm gesturing off the camera.
Miles, I see you waving your hand.
Go.
I don't want to break in, but I want to say I'm somewhere between you guys. I write a 40-page outline. I didn't used to, by the way. I used to write no outline at all. I think I did about 20 books with no outline. And
just 20.
Just 20, just like, before
my
breakfast.
My future career is speaking to me here.
But somewhere in the middle of the Red Knight series, I realized that with 170 characters, I wasn't keeping up without an outline. And that may actually be aging brain. Like we change too. It's not just that our characters change. But what I want to say, to sort of everybody, to Peter and Alina and whatever is, I write a 40-page outline. It's pretty meticulous. It's a lot of it is frame, and very like what Peter is saying, a motionless frame, very Vulcan. But the thing is that I jumped that shark in 5 seconds, and often by page 100, there's nothing left of my outline. And yet I've learned a lot from I've learned a lot from writing the outline. I've learned a lot about what I'm going to do and what I'm not going to do. I just don't need the outline anymore. So I fall somewhere between in that the outline isn't a waste of time. The 40-page outline, and my dad, who is a professional writer and has been all his life, always says, like, never write for free. Never write anything that someone isn't paying you for. And I always feel a little guilty writing outlines because nobody's paying me to do that. But
that's not true. I don't accept that. The outline is part of your process for writing the finished book.
Peter, I'm kidding. Sorry, my sarcasm.
I may have been drinking bourbon.
My sarcasm may have been too dry. All I'm saying is I don't feel bound by the outline I've written. And often I jump those tracks and drive off somewhere else. And it's still not a waste of time. And that's what I've started telling people, because I used to say, oh, I don't outline. I don't need to outline. Now I need to outline.
It's not even need, though. Like, for me, it's different, though. It's different because, like, Peter, you've never had the situation. Like, this is me for writing. Writing for me is like, I don't know, it's like watching like a soap opera, because I'll be writing and then this character that I had in mind and I had some ideas for them, they like do something totally different and are something totally different than I thought they were. And I'm like, oh, damn, it turned out she was his daughter all along. Oh, no.
Alina, that never, so what you're describing right now, this experience of you have the character is so fully fleshed in your mind, you put them on the stage and they do stuff that you don't want them to, and it takes the story in a new direction. Never happens to me, ever. And I've always
it will.
That's it's Mike's dream for that to happen. For a character to come so to life in his head that it tells him what to do. Like, he's dreamt of that for years. I know this for a fact.
Stinking time. I never write a book where that doesn't happen. And like, I think part of it too is like, I saw this great article about how actors and actresses, when they're acting, they actually have their brain's prefrontal cortex regulating identity is suppressed, and so they actually have less of a sense of their own identity when they're acting, because they're sort of subsumed in this altered state of consciousness by being this other person. And I kind of feel like that's how writing is for me. It's like an altered state of consciousness. Like when I'm writing, I am not me, I am those other people. And sometimes those other people are just like, I'm going to do what I want to do. Like, I've had so many instances, and they always make it better because I always have these instances where like you expect, because the plot needs something to happen, or you need like this character to get along with this other character or whatever. And then the other character's like, why don't I just fucking kill him? And you're like, you should, but if you, oh, yeah, that's a good point. You probably should just kill. Yeah, just
like a D&D game.
Yeah, badass. Like, right. Like, but I mean, like, but it's like you're sitting there and it's your own head, and you're like, how did my own brain surprise me? It doesn't make any sense. Like, that shouldn't happen. But yeah, it happens all the time.
It makes sense because, I mean, it's the other side of your process, isn't it? I mean, if you write without an outline, then you're kind of weaving the characters together as you write the story. They're coming together in your head, they're coming together on the page, and it makes sense that process should sometimes be should sometimes take a direction that's different from the one that you originally had in mind.
Yeah, when I say don't outline too, I want to make it clear, like when Miles was saying like, oh, I write chronologically, but it turns out I don't write chronologically, because if you actually make me write chronologically where I don't get to go back and change anything, it turns out that I like to go back and change things. And for me, like, I don't outline. I did spend a month doing research and writing notes to myself. My notes are the notes of a crazy person. They're literally as the thoughts occurred to me, not in an order that would make sense to anyone using it. And there's like 50,000 words of just thoughts that occurred to me, and like, oh, this scene should maybe look like this, or oh, this castle should look like this, or oh, isn't this a cool thing that we saw from the chivalric romance? And they're just in no order at all for 50,000 words.
See, I have those things, and when I have those ideas, I go through my outline and I find the appropriate place where they belong, and I put them in there. And then when I get to that point of the story, I put them in. I don't just, like, and this is like, so there's two things here. And one is like my outline is sacrosanct. Like, when I write an outline, by the time it's done and I start writing prose, I trust that outline, and I have to trust it the whole way. Maybe once a book, a character, like I'll get to a point and I'm in the character's emotional state and the plot tells them to do something and the character's just like, nope, not going to do that. That'd be stupid. That's not me. Not going to do that. And then I have like an oh shit moment and have to sort of tear a chapter apart and rewrite it and fix it. So like it does happen like once in a while. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen all the time. But the thing is, the different thing about your writing backwards camera. The thing about, I can't even point at you. The thing about your writing process is that you are writing 7 books at the same time. Like, how many projects are you working on right now?
Who's that?
I know you. Like every one of you, because I'm working on 1.
3.
3,
4.
5.
0.
If you count the short nonfiction, I just picked up 2 articles for Ancient Warfare. So if you're counting short nonfiction, I'm working on 5 projects at once.
Jesus Christ. How do you do that? Like, that's the thing. You're juggling all of that in your head. Like, of course you can't like focus on a coherent like outline if you're just juggling all that in your head. And but the thing is, like, it works. But the thing is, like, Dark Gift is different for all of us. I wish I could do that shit. I wish I could work on 5 projects at once.
I could do a coherent outline. I just will do the coherent outline and then I will never touch that book again. No, because I will just never write. Like, I did an outline one time in my life. One of my like 200 manuscripts before Stealing Thunder, I did a detailed outline like you're talking about. And then my brain was like, look, job's done. You did the book. And I was like, well, no, now we have to actually write it. And it was like, but we know what's going to happen. So all the joy is gone. Well, goodbye. And that was the other. I never went back to it. Like, that was it.
Myke and I talk about this all the time, where it's just like authors are always like, well, if I write the plot and I know what's going to happen, it's not fun anymore. And I'm just like, why should you expect your job to be fun?
Right.
Because it's great.
You are working.
Because if my job isn't fun, I won't do it.
No, but Miles.
I've had a lot of jobs in my life that weren't fun, and I still did them.
Right.
This is the thing. It's like, writing is not fun. Writing is work. Like, writing is a lot of mental processing power. I like looking back at what I've written.
So this is
I got a paycheck for all the hours that I spent. Like, if it was a salaried position where they're like, you're a writer, 8 hours a day, here's your salary and your benefits, and then I'd be like, oh, okay, it's not fun. It's not fun every day, but when you're writing it, it's like, well, this may or may not sell. Your agent may or may not like it. Your editor may or may not like it. And then people may or may not buy it. Well, I mean, holy cow! Like, at some point, you have to be like, well, it needs to be something for me too. At that point, then.
I've actually written about this. So this is where the misery ethic comes in handy. And I think, Miles, you were Canadian Navy, right? Miles, you were in the Canadian Navy?
United States Navy. Thanks you very much, Myke.
Okay, sorry.
Hi.
I apologize. I see Miles as a Canadian. Are you not a Canadian? I
am totally Canadian. However, I am very proud of my United States Navy service.
I am very proud of your United States Navy service. Okay, well, so one of the things that Miles will be familiar with is that you cultivate this sense of the idea that crucibles turn iron into steel. And the longer you stay in the crucible and the hotter the crucible is, the stronger the steel is. There's a reason.
That's not true.
Well, there's a reason. There's a metaphor.
Chemically not true.
It is absolutely chemically not true.
Chemically, that's not how that works.
I'm
about to reach for my copy of The Night in the Blast Furnace to tears.
No,
that is amazing.
Alina is of course correct. At least culturally, though, that is the ethic that is imprinted on all of us. This idea that if you suffer more, Stephen Pressfield talks about this, that if you meet United States Marines and you try to complain about anything, the Marine invariably will try to one-up you on how they had it worse. It's like that Monty Python skit. You're familiar with it. You know, they used to wake us up 3 hours before we went to bed. That Monty Python skit. But that misery ethic, that idea that when you're suffering, that is a pathway to producing something great, that there will be a reward for your suffering. It's certainly not uniquely military, but it is part of American military culture, at least. And it's something that I'm familiar with and that Miles is likely familiar with. And there is a piece of that is useful to me, at least, when I sit down and have the experience that Alina is describing, because I learned how to write from Pete. So I have these long.
That's not true.
We learned to
That is not
suffer.
true.
Well,
We learned to
That is a
suffer.
lie.
I get to decide who I
Mike and
learn
I
writing
taught each
from.
other how to write. We've been rereading. We've been reading and commenting on each other's work for since 1997. How long is that? That's a lot. A long time.
Yes, I'm very old. But the point I want to make here is one of the things I took from Pete is this structuring process that Alina just described as kind of sucking the joy out of it. Anyone who knows me on Twitter knows that I'm anti-joy in all of its forms. But the point is, I get into writing, and it is that labor, and it is that, look, I don't want to sit down and write. I want to check Twitter. I want to play video games. I want to, talk to my friends. I want to go for a walk. I want to do anything but write. And I'm in good company, right? I know Agatha Christie has famously said that she wants to do anything but write, or famously said that she wanted to do anything but write. And I draw on this misery ethic, this military misery ethic, that suffer now, and that knowing that the reward will be sublime work in the future. And that is something I used to, it's bullshit, of course, but I use that at least to galvanize myself through that process of like, this sucks. Why am I doing it? I don't want to do it. I want to do this shiny thing over here.
Mike, I will support everything you say about Sparta, but I am completely antithetical on this subject.
So go ahead.
Me too.
Go ahead.
I'm with you because I will go for
I
a
love
walk.
to write. I probably love to write above almost all things in the world.
I
would probably write if no one paid me. One of the things I really believe that I hope my wife cannot hear me say right now is I walked out of clandestine operations and said, I am never doing a fucking job I don't enjoy again as long as I live. There are like two things I took out of the military. One was the only real time that I was seriously threatened and shot at. When it was over, one of my friends said, basically, like, you're never going to complain about crappy beer again, are you? And I was like, no, you're right. All beer is good. Like, I have learned what bad
You still feel that way?
I still kind of do. And the other thing is, like, no, I'm never going to do a job I don't want to do. I love writing. Sorry, Mike, I don't want you to feel I'm taking you on.
No. Don't worry. Process is
Canadian and you coming out now.
I love writing, and I am a good new Canadian, but I love writing, and I love the story, and I think I'm kind of lining up with Alina. I want to know what happens, and if you make me write too much outline, sometimes I kind of go like, well, now I know what happens. Like that's there's no surprises left. And if you don't write,
the thing is, you're creating this false dichotomy between job I love, and I'm trying to talk to my hands on the screen here, job I love and job I don't love, and like there's this divide between them, and like if I love it, I have to be having fun, and if I don't love it, I'm not having fun. And you know what? I love my job. I love it. I am doing the thing that I've always wanted to do for my entire life. I'm so freaking fortunate to get to write books, as a career, and be able to support myself and my family by doing that. Like, I have nothing but respect for that, and I'm so happy about it. And I would not choose any other job. But writing itself is still hard, and it's work. I look back at my books when they're done, and I really enjoy them. I listen to my own audiobooks when I want to refresh my memory on what's going on, and like I get swept up in the story because I have a different narrator sort of telling it to me, and like I really like I'm happy with my work, but the actual process when I'm doing it is hard and it's work, and sometimes I've already spoiled it for myself, and I don't get to find out what happens at the end in a big surprise. I have to just
Peter, that
carefully mold it out of
you.
Clay.
It's not a false dichotomy for me.
For me,
I would say this too.
Smart gifts come to us all differently.
For me, the false dichotomy is between the sort of the planning as purgatory and the writing of the novel as a prize, because I enjoy outlining. Outlining is just one stage. Even before I get to that, I've done like pages and pages and pages of the kind of notes that Alina was describing, which falls short of an outline, just notes about different aspects of the world. And it's a process of acclimatization. You're creating a space, and you're starting to inhabit that space, and you do it by degrees. And the outline is part of that, and it's a pleasurable and an essential part for me.
My
I would
fear,
say that, like, for me,
I
though,
agree. I think writing the
it's-
outline is definitely more fun than writing the prose, but they both have their own rewards. I find outline writing is a lot more easygoing and fun because that's the time of discovery, and that's putting the puzzle together and creating this sort of skeleton out of all of these random pieces. But then, like, the prose writing for me is the emotional part, and getting in character and then writing that from that character's point of view and putting your head in that point of view for a while and creating a scene that's really what they're feeling is mentally exhausting to me. Maybe as an introvert, I don't know, but like I find that part really exhausting. And so like I put off doing it, and then when I've done it, I feel really like drained and like need to recharge before I can do it again. And so it's as Myke says, it's two different phases of the creative process rather than just doing it all at once.
Well, I would say that for me, like, my brother once told me you're a method writer, and I don't think he's wrong, because I just like LARP my books. Like, I think Miles probably is with me on this. I just LARP my books. Like, I just am like, okay, well, I'm gonna do something with 13th century Occitan right now, so I guess I better get some recipes from that so that I can cook them at home and understand what that food tastes like. And like, I do the research. Like, I will like listen to the music they were listening to. I will read the literature they were reading. I will get into every aspect of the history. I will buy swatches of cloth that were woven in the same way that they wove them and see what
Alina,
that
are we
feels
the
like.
same person?
I mean, I feel like
I
people
gotta
are gonna
tell
blend
you-
really well together. It'll get along really well.
That's
because,
what
like,
all these books are.
right, exactly. All my books are like cookbooks, like Occitan cookbooks, medieval cookbooks. I have cookbooks of all the dishes from Shah Jahan's personal chef, and actually dishes from all of the other Mughal emperors as well for Stealing Thunder. I have like so many, like in my Zahaks for Stealing Thunder. They're all based on the fact that I like trained falcons for a living for a while, and like
Miles,
basically the whole thing is
Miles.
LARPed, I guess.
Alina met Pete and I at the last night exhibit at the Met, which was this incredible exhibit, and we were there on the last day. An incredible exhibit about Maximilian.
the last night.
Miles, it would have been so much better if you could have been there with us. Like it was such a great day.
I would have brought you.
The
Yeah.
really terrible thing is I
Miles,
only
I
missed
have an
doing
important
it by
question.
2 days. I was in Philly 2 days later visiting my best friend, and he was there on the last day with his wife. So you guys were probably all in the Met at the same time, and all I could see was their pictures.
Miles, if you and Alina have a sword fight and you're both using claymores, can you still be social distancing?
I mean, what depends on what claymore are you talking about? Are you talking about like the two-handed sword? Or are you talking about the later broadsword that's also called a claymore? Because
the two-hander, the big, like, you know, Braveheart.
A montante. Yeah, if we're using
can you
montantes,
social distance if you're that far apart without
Not
getting
No, because you have to close.
the kill zone.
If we get to close play, all of a sudden it's dangerous.
But you can't really fight
We might be
close
wearing
with a
masks.
claymore.
Yes, you can.
What?
Yes, you can.
Once
Yes,
you're
you
that
can.
close
Yes,
to the
you can.
claymore,
Oh
you're
yeah, of
dead.
course you can.
Sword and thrusting.
Any longsword fighting.
I don't know.
Longsword is a crowbar to allow you to get to close play.
Yes.
Actually,
I mean, if you're in armor,
This is why I don't have any swords in my books.
you'll appreciate this, Miles. I tweeted out idly, like I reviewed a book by Eric Lowe called "On the Use of Medieval Weaponry" for a quote. It's excellent, and he's a HEMA practitioner, and he did a really great historical analysis too. It's a wonderful piece of public history, and I did give the quote, and I'm looking forward to seeing what people think of it. But I tweeted idly, if it wasn't for this pandemic, I would go try out HEMA. And immediately Alina is DMing me on Twitter being like, I can give you exercises right now to start training. So
we'll just do a video and do it.
Yeah, you're ready to start. So
the thing about armor is that it's real and it really works.
Yeah.
And
it's amazing. It's crazy.
So when you have really good armor, people pretty much can't hit you or hurt you unless they put you on the ground first.
Yeah.
Which is
and
why
then stab you through your eye slot.
Is why so many world martial arts that have descended to us in fractures have to do with close grappling and ground fighting, because when you're in armor, you're really hard to hurt.
Yeah.
Until you're on the ground and helpless.
Miles, I wish you could. I wish you'd been at the Met with us.
Unless you have a pole axe.
Yeah.
In which case you're fucked. So that's fine.
Or
Like even Henry
dragon.
VIII. Henry VIII would not spar with poleaxe against his friends because you couldn't spar for pleasure with a poleaxe, even in full armor in the 16th century. So,
Alina, in modern HEMA combat, I won't fight poleaxe anymore because I've had 2 concussions and our poleaxes are rubber. Like
I just had a concussion from Blosfectin. I was wearing a mask that was a little bit ill-fitting, and back in February, the guy did a Durchwechsel and I missed it, and I walked right into it really hard and hit me in the head. And the end of that week, I didn't know what had happened that week. I didn't know what the days were. I didn't like, and so this is actually like talking about, you know, your process is different depending on brain plasticity scares the hell out of me, because I was like, there was a period of about a month and a half where I just was like, I can't see bright lights. I can't really drive a car. I can't.
And Alina and I were texting throughout this entire period.
And yet, Alina, you went canoeing or kayaking on the river in that period.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to sit around and do nothing. Like, that's crazy.
I'd just like to say that
You
I
could
got
have
my
rested.
concussion.
I was so worried, Miles. I was like, holy shit, Alina just went canoeing on this friggin' river. It's a windy day. She has
with a concussion.
Like, what am I gonna do if there's a problem?
I mean, I was just like, you know, the Coast Guard will save me. Myke will be there.
Yeah.
Some younger version of Myke. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well,
that was
good
a good
decisions
one.
made.
Well, anyway, you got better. And,
Supposedly, I mean, I can write 50,000 words.
well, you're writing again.
Yeah. I don't know if it's good or not. I guess my agent could be like,
This conversation took a strange turn.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry. It's my fault. It's my fault.
I honestly wanted to let it. I wanted to see where it went.
I love
Let it burn out.
Yeah.
The conversation is unfair to Myke Carey, who is not getting his fair amount of time.
Reenactment
Myke
combat.
Carey, tell us about your live action sword fighting experience.
I choose not to. I was going to ask a question. Coming back to this question of this issue of the perfecting of your craft, do you think it's something that happens at a steady pace, or is it something that works by sort of sudden jumps forward, crises and saccades? Do you develop constantly, or do you develop as a result of grappling with particular things at particular times?
that sounds to me like you have an answer to that question that's interesting, and I would like to hear it.
No, I mean,
it's a spectrum. You know, there's no one or the other. You know, there is the slow incremental work that makes your work better. You know, the long editing process of like, I'm going to retailer this sentence, and I'm going to retailer that sentence, take out these extraneous words, and I'm going to, you know, like there's that process, which is just tedious. And then there are these big moments where it's like, oh, I see the big hole in the story, and now that I see it, I can go back and trim these things and fix it. And like that, you know, so there are these moments, these big like eureka moments where you see something in a new way, and that makes you make the story better. But there are also these incremental, like, I can fix this, I can fix this, I can make this sentence better, I can make this voice better, I can make this character, you know, streamline in a bunch of important facts about themselves in the middle of this conversation, and no one will even know, but it's there. Like there are little things that you can do step by step, but there are also gotcha moments that really make a big difference. And in the end, who can say which one is more important?
I'm stuck on the fact that Myke used the term saccades, and I consider myself to be a very intelligent person who is proficient in the use of English, and I've never heard that word before in my life.
It's where instead of tracking something steadily with your eyes flick around places. That's a saccade.
So it just means a sudden jump, a discontinuity.
I mean, you probably are going to have nothing but saccades. You will not have smooth tracking at this point, Myke Cole.
Myke,
I didn't know what it meant either. I just pretended.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Miles.
He just agreed. That's
it even sounds to me like it has a
I'm being
solid
honest.
ancient Greek root, and I didn't get it at all.
I was about to say, like, I'm in the scene,
really?
I'm like, oh shit, I'm in a room with smart people.
I'm a
know.
3-year-old. I have to agree with everything.
I know it because of birds.
I
used to train birds.
I'm just like, oh yeah, really? Okay.
Myke, I'm sorry. You asked an intelligent question, and once again, I have managed to derail the entire panel.
I was going to say that one of the big sort of discontinuities for me, the big jumps forward, that could not have been predicted. I spent 2 years, 2012 to 2014, collaborating with 2 women, my wife and our daughter. We wrote 2 novels together. We did it by triangulating on a style and a voice that worked for all 3 of us. We wrote sample chapters. We read them aloud to each other. We argued a lot about the voice and the tone. And we ended up with a kind of a pastiche style, a style that worked for all 3 of us. And I came out of that 2-year period sensitized to stuff that I used to do by default. I was sort of like thinking about things that I just usually just did without any conscious reflection at all. And that was when I wrote, it was coming out of that I wrote Girl with All the Gifts, which I think was enormously different from anything I'd written up to that time. Present tense, multiple points of view, very, very short declarative sentences. It was taking risks that I hadn't been taking.
Well, this is good because Girl with All the Gifts obviously is a very, very famous and a very, very successful book. So what do you think, what changed? Like, so like clearly this 2-year period was some kind of great leap forward for you, right?
Yeah.
What changed? So. What specifically changed?
I think it was just that I was at that stage. I was writing the same book again and again. When I was writing the Castor novels, they worked to a formula. They had a voice which was kind of borrowed from Raymond Chandler with the serial numbers filed off, and I was comfortable doing that. And I might have gone on doing it for a long, long time. Coming out of those writing City of Silk and Steel and House of War and Witness, I just found that it was easier to play games. It was easier to play games with voice and style. It was easier to sort of to depart from the way I did it before. So it wasn't a specific thing. It was a freedom. It was degrees of freedom, I think.
Do you know what gave you that freedom? Like, I mean, it's a really interesting question because The Girl with All the Gifts was, unless I'm mistaken, that was your breakout book, right? That was the book that made, okay. So,
but it's exactly what you've been saying, Myke, is that it's where you are in your life, you know, and that colors your perspective and that changes the way that you write. And I think like the way I write kids now that I have kids is very different than the way I would have written kids before. And like my main character in this new book is intersex, and that has absolutely changed the way I look at language on a level that you know, like every sentence that has a gendered word, I'm looking at that sentence with a level of attention that I would never have bothered with before that, because my head wasn't in that space. And it's not that I like don't care about those things, but there were things, you know, there was just a way that gendered language works. When you learn a language, when you learn French, everything is gendered. When you learn English, a lot of things are gendered. And it's not until you start saying like, oh wait, now I need to take that apart, that it changes the whole perspective on how you write. And I think certainly like writing a book by committee, like with your wife and with your daughter, and having to get to a level of agreement is going to change the way that you look at that whole story and change the way you look at your female characters dramatically. And so like it's where you are in your life. It's an extension of that.
Yeah, I think it is.
And practice. I think it's practice. You said you spent what, 2 years, you said, writing that with your wife and your daughter? I mean, 2 years of practice writing a totally different style than what you're used to writing.
That's 30 years in Alina time.
I mean, 2 years. 2 years is like 12 novels. I mean, that's a long time.
Well, but
like
it's a fascinating question, because when people come to me on Twitter as a published writer, aspiring writers all want the same thing, right? They want the magic key. How do I produce work that will get me published by the big New York houses? And then when I talk to other mid-listing writers, I'm a mid-listing writer. When I talk to the mid-listing writers, the magic key we're all chasing is what will give me a breakout novel, what will give me a book that will get a movie deal, that will be a New York Times bestseller. What is the secret formula to that? And what's fascinating about
book out in 2008 with a hooded character on the cover.
Well, I mean, you know, but the thing that's fascinating, Myke, about what you're describing is, and I don't know that there's a packaged answer that you can give, right? It may be that the process is opaque to you, but what you are in effect describing is that magic key, right? You're describing a period in your life where prior to that, you're doing well, but you're mid-listing. And then after that, I mean, The Girl with All the Gifts is a famous book, right? You're going to die. That book will be known to people 100 years from now. Well, I mean,
5 years, 6 years.
I mean, that The Girl with All the Gifts, the girl
His
with all the
Hellblazer work is really going to stand up over time, I think.
I mean, that's true too. But the point is that there's a difference in the level of success between your prior work and this work. And so I would wager that audiences would be really interested in knowing, to the extent that you know, what changes in this period.
But I think to some extent it's not something that you're in control of. I mean, definitely Girl with All the Gifts was written in a different style and in a different voice to the cast of novels and the mainstream thrillers. But the other thing that happened was I gave that into my publishers, and they looked at it and they thought, this could be a crossover book. It could appeal to, it's a zombie novel, but it could be read by people who don't read zombie novels. So they marketed it in a specific way. They didn't use the Z word in any of the pre-publicity. They put more marketing muscle behind it. They did a big ARC and sent it out to a lot of people. It's partly that they decided it could succeed in a different way. And they
made that decision based on the quality of the work. It's not like they just pick any old book and put all of that muscle behind it. They picked that book very carefully,
right?
Because it has the chops to go that distance,
right?
You know, it's still, you still have to stand on the quality of your work. Like I'm not downplaying the efforts of the publisher, because publishers do a lot more than people think they do. But I also don't want you to downplay your own achievement, because your own achievement is great here and would not have gotten that level of promotion if the quality of the work wasn't there.
I am proud of the book. It's just I don't know whether the success of the book is to do with is solely a question of the writing of the book, whether it's partly a question of marketing, partly a question of time and place and serendipity. I mean, the other thing that was different was I was screenwriting properly for the first time, and I was writing the screenplay for that story at the same time as I was writing the novel, which probably affected the storytelling in a fairly profound way.
Myke, why were you writing the screenplay synchronously with the novel? Was it optioned before the novel? I mean, what was the motivator behind that?
There was a short story called Iphigenia and Alice, and the short story became both the novel and the film.
So you had Hollywood interest based on the short story while you were writing the novel. That was a motivator.
It was BFI interest. It was it was a British thing, not a Hollywood thing.
I don't know what BFI. Do you mind?
British Film Institute.
Yeah, British Film Institute. So initially, it was purely the seed money came from the UK. And it was quite small amounts. In the end, we got Warner's on board as the UK distributors, and that released a bit more money. But I think writing the screenplay and the novel side by side meant that I approached the storytelling in a different way. I think it probably made it leaner and sharper.
How leaner, sharper? How so? If you don't mind me.
I guess it focused me down a lot more. There's not much wasted space in a screenplay. In a screenplay, pretty much every line has to earn its keep, and you get challenged if you put stuff in just because it's a cool character beat or it's a nice emotional touch or whatever. You'll get challenged on it if it's not there for a storytelling purpose. So I think that fed back into the book.
This was what happened when I tried to write comics, and I guess also when I tried to write a first-person book is like you enter in saying like, oh, I'm a writer and I've read a lot of comics and I love comics, and so I know how to write comics. But, I think maybe 1/5 of the prose that I wrote in my scripts made it into the comic.
Yep.
Because there was a whole shift of perspective that I had to make where like I would describe these things for the artist, and then the art comes back and like, okay, now I need to make the story work with this art. And that means throwing away a lot of the stuff that I had written. And so that learning curve made me a much leaner and tighter storyteller.
Yep.
In the same way that when I was a dungeon master in college, like keeping 5 or 6 people entertained and interested meant that you couldn't, roll out the story in the sort of slow way that you wanted to. We're like, oh, they talk to the innkeeper and the innkeeper gives them a rumor and that rumor leads them over here. And then, you plan all this stuff out and then they just kill the innkeeper and take his stuff. And you have to figure out a way to keep everybody entertained, So
no outlines.
Those moments change you as a writer. Absolutely.
Yeah. Writing comics is absolutely Myke and Alina. Miles, have you worked on comics at all?
I've done 3 graphic novels.
Okay, all right. So then everyone here will. I don't think anybody. I don't think here will disagree with me. But I found that this is my first comic I've ever worked on. But the experience and to approach it, what did I do? I read Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, which for those of you. It is. For those of you in the audience who are unfamiliar with this, please read it. It is a comic book itself about how to make comics. And it's just...
And how comics work. Even if you're not a comic creator, it's worth reading.
It's really amazing. And then I read his comic, The Sculptor. But the point is, I went to school. But that process of distilling things down. So one of my favorite openings in a novel is in Joe Abercrombie's The Heroes. Joe Abercrombie has these 2 characters meeting on what will soon be a battlefield, and they have a very short conversation. I'm talking a page and a half tops. And you come away from these very few lines of dialogue with a complete understanding of who the characters are, what their motivations are, what their internal flaws are that keep them from achieving their goals, what the world is, what the conflict is. This is all delivered in a page and a half in a few lines of punchy dialogue. When you read truly great comics, 100 Bullets, 3, Fables. These are some of my favorite comics. You see in the Hellblazers, of course. Yeah. Sorry, Myke. I mean, look, I work with your artists. That's the best compliment. The best compliment I can pay you is I'm working with Tony Akins. But that process of that distillation that you're describing, Pete and I have a term for this. We call it all mules must haul wood. That's
your term.
This is Pete's term that he forced me to use. Is that when we write novels,
it's one of those military speak things that Myke has just gotten me to say sometimes.
Right. Well, but Myke, the point here is that one of the things we do, and I think it was Alina who said that she savagely prunes her manuscripts, is that process of going back through and looking at every sentence and saying, does this further character? Does this further plot? Does this, or is this a flourish? It's funny in architecture. If you're submitting an architecture project to a grading committee, that committee will often bounce aspects of your building and they'll call it arbitrary. If you're an architect, the term arbitrary is the kiss of death. Something being arbitrary means that you just put it in there and it has no purpose. And it's how you fail in architecture class. I just know this from having friends that are architects. But the same is true in the screenwriting and comic writing process, that distillation down to making sure that every mule is hauling wood that furthers either plot or character. That's an experience I've had from writing comics, and it's made me a lot better. And it sounds like it's sort of what you're describing in your own.
Yeah, it's what I meant when I said that I learned to write by doing comics. I couldn't structure story until I did it in the comic book. But I think in a more general way,
working within those confines.
But it's great. It's great as a writer to work in different media, because every medium is a toolbox, and the tools in the box are not the same. And so you learn a lot about your craft by being forced to sort of jump between different forms of storytelling, I think.
Actually, I have two pieces there that most people I think don't have. One is intelligence writing. So I'm an intelligence officer now for the private sector, and I was an intelligence officer, and I think, Miles, so were you, right? You did intel. So intelligence writing is a...
And she's like back in his chair, like, yes, I did do intelligence work. Like,
well,
he looks like a Bond villain.
Right, so don't confuse.
Yeah, he's like, Myke, we don't talk about this. Why are you talking about this?
I'm a terrible intelligence officer. But so intelligence writing is interesting in that intelligence writing is you have to give information and analysis to operational commanders and decision makers, and it must be bereft of emotion. It must be. Because what you have to do is give them clear information that they can use to make decisions. And if you emote at all, then you are leading the witness, so to speak. And they may make decisions based on your emotive And oftentimes you're talking about things that invite emotion. You're talking about foreign governments that are attempting to influence an American election. You are talking about terrorism, acts of terrorism that are resulting in civilian dead. And this act of sanitizing this of emotion is a completely different kind of writing. And yet, when you write history, which is something else that Miles has done, or when you do journalism, which is something I've done, I'm not sure if other folks on here have also done journalism. It's something I'm doing more and more of, both history and journalism. This kind of analytical style of writing, this antiseptic, just the facts and analysis that's supported by data, is exactly what Myke is describing. You are still writing, right? It's the same. It has this in common with your fiction, but the goal and the underpinnings are completely different, and in fact, in many ways, opposite. And so, like, this experience of using this set of tools that you have, because in fiction writing, what do you want to do? You want to evoke emotion. You want to create resonance and wonder. Man, you don't want to do that in an intelligence product. Like, that is the end of the world if you have done something like that. And it's amazing. It's not something I talk about much, and maybe I should, but it is amazing to see the overlap of these things, that how writing history has impacted me as a fiction writer, how writing intelligence has impacted me as a fiction writer, because it surely has.
All right, guys, I hate to cut it. We're just about out of time. So everybody take a moment to pimp a book, since we can't do this in person and have signings or anything. So Miles, if you want to start.
Pimp one of your 41 books.
I write fairly fast, so I always have a couple of books in the Cold Iron is my current fantasy series. I'm actually writing a Bronze Age anti-surveillance capitalism series right now, but we won't get into that because it's still a secret. So my current fantasy is Cold Iron. There's 3 of them. They're all done. The series is done. I hear they're good. And my current historical is called The Last Greek. It's about Philopoemen. Philopoemen of Achaia sort of invented the world of today in terms of federal states and the idea that groups of states or provinces could be gathered together in a federation. He was also a hell of a good soldier and a fairly deep thinker. And I really enjoy Stoic philosophy. I try to put philosophy into every book I write. And he was a pretty decent philosopher. So there's my spiel. And by the way, this has been really fun. Really great getting to see you. And Myke, Carey, I'm a big fan.
Lag here,
I didn't emote all the way through this, but I just want to say, like, wow. Okay. Anyway.
I think I've lost everybody today.
All right, Alina.
Sure. So Stealing Thunder is my debut book. It is out now as of May 12th. Yes, hiding my face. I was asked in an interview to describe it in like 5 words, and I was like, oh, it's pretty woman with dragons in Mughal India. And that's not too far off the mark. It's got a trans girl main character, the first major fantasy book to do that. And yeah, I think it's really cool. I brought a lot to it that maybe I shouldn't have brought to it, like fighter piloting with dragons. Like, I don't know why I felt the need to have,
Why would you not bring that to it?
Well, because nobody else has ever brought that to it, right? It's the first time anybody's been like,
Exactly.
Whoa.
Whoa,
I have
what?
I have air-to-air combat with dragons too.
Do you? Oh, okay. But do they follow the rules of BFM? Are they lead and lag pursuing their other dragons, or like? I mean,
I was a naval aviator.
Oh, perfect. Then we're good.
I can chase a
weird,
watch
like,
with
two
my
souls
hand.
turned in half thing going on here.
We're gonna get together so well, because I'm just gonna be like, because
I think we should
I got lag
co-write a
roll.
novel.
There's like a lag roll defense to a high side guns pass in my book, and it's great. So nobody wants to read it now. Anyway, so whatever. It's fun. It's got a cool setting. I hope you like it. It'll be out. It's out now, and then the sequel will be out in a year. So if I get to my edits and do them in time. So yeah.
All right, Myke, Carey.
Just to bump. Go on.
So I've got a fantasy novel that just came out in the UK and USA called The Book of Coley, which is the first volume in a trilogy. It's post-apocalyptic. It's about 2 or 3 centuries after the fall of our current global civilization. It's a coming of age story. It's a young teenage boy in the north of England trying to pass a test which will make him become a member of the elite group in his society, failing the test, and then basically going wandering through the world and discovering our world through discovering his. I've also got a horror graphic novel coming out from DC in September called The Dollhouse Family, which was reunited me with Peter Gross and Todd Klein and Vince Locke. And it just looks gorgeous.
Fantastic. Pete?
Awesome.
Yeah, it looks like we lost Myke.
Where'd Myke go?
He was having
done.
some technical issues. I'm like texting with him. Like he had a technical issue. He dropped off. Like if he can come back on, he will.
We can pimp 16th watch for him.
So this is The Warded Man. My mom says it's super good. It's the first book in my series. Blah blah blah. I want to pimp Alina's book. Stealing Thunder came out this week, and you know what? Like all the bookstores are closed, and I thought that this book was going to take the world by storm because it's so amazing, and like it's a little harder right now because of plague.
I will buy a copy today.
But
Thank you.
I was given the manuscript of it by the editor, and I read it on a plane, like a transatlantic flight, and I basically like read the entire book in one sitting on that flight, and it was freaking amazing. And I'm like so happy that it's out in the world now and other people can see it because it's such a fantastic book. And so I just bought the audiobook. I'm gonna read it all over again in a different format, and I really recommend that everybody else should too.
Thanks so much,
Stealing
Peter.
Thunder,
It does
Alina
read.
Boyden.
It does read as fast as I wrote it, so that's good.
That's the thing. I read it in about as long as the computer read it.
Yes.
And then I guess for Myke, he just had 16th Watch come out from Angry Robot, and he's also got a trilogy from Tor, which is called, I think it's The Sacred Throne. I read the trilogy like it. It's freaking amazing.
Mike's Wi-Fi went out. That's his problem.
Okay.
And so Sacred Throne trilogy, Armored Saint is the first book. Those are fantastic books, absolutely worth your time. He also has the Shadow Ops books from Ace Rock. There's 2 trilogies there, also fantastic work. Legion versus Phalanx is his.
Legion versus Phalanx. I got a lot of fans who have already loved that, so I'll just throw in a.
It's a great book. Yeah, I read that one
really,
too.
really good book, and everyone should own it.
My dad loves it.
Yeah.
Let me pimp 16th Watch though, because 16th Watch I read an advanced copy of, and I just want to say when he was like, "Oh, I'm doing a military sci-fi," I was like, "Okay, military sci-fi, great." And he's like, "I'm doing military sci-fi with the Coast Guard." I was like, "Oh, what? The Coast Guard?"
Coast Guard in
I was
space is the real tagline.
Coast Guard in space. And I was like, "Oh my god, it's actually a realistic military sci-fi." Like I love my space starfighters, and I know that they would never happen, and it doesn't work that way, but I love them because I like airplanes. But like then when he was like Coast Guard, I was like, oh my god. And that's my first military
search and rescue crews get no cred.
Yeah, and it was the first one I read.
They do all the hard work.
Yeah, and I read it, and it was the first one I read where I was like, this is what's going to happen in the future. Like this is what the future will look like, not like, oh, this is a cool story. So it's pretty neat. Yeah, you should check it out.
Fantastic. Well, everybody,
Miles and Navy steal all the glory, but
yeah, right. Well, everybody, thank y'all so much for taking the time out of your day to come be on the panel. It has been amazing listening to y'all. I mean, obviously, I only asked one question, and you guys just took it. So thanks for making my afternoon a little easier. But thank y'all so much. I know everybody that's been tuning in has been ranting and raving about it, and I wish this panel could go on longer, but unfortunately, we've got 2 more coming up. So, but let's maybe try to do this again and try to continue the conversation at a later date, especially if this whole thing continues for who knows how long. But I'd love to get y'all all together again and chat some more. So, but just thank y'all again, and you'll enjoy the rest of your weekends and stay safe.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank y'all.
Fantastic.